If you've seen our channel before, you know that we love a tier list. We've done microphone tier lists, we've done compressors, we've done plugins, and something that we get requested to do a ton is actually do a tier list on preamps and channel strips. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. I'm going to look at over 30 different preamps and channel strips, rank them, and give you my thoughts and opinions on them. These are all units that I've either owned or tried out or used in a studio on a session. So as we dive in, just kind of keep that in mind. Also, this is going to be extremely subjective. This is just my thoughts and opinions. You might have a completely different set of experiences or thoughts on a single unit. That's no problem. I just want to kind of give you my kind of feedback on them. And then the one thing that I will say is at the time of me filming this, there was a preamp tier list actually uploaded by somebody named Andrew Chapman Creative. It was literally done after we had completely written and scheduled this video, but I have not watched that video. I don't know what preamps he's ranking, and I don't know what his actual ranking would be. So with that said, if you want to go watch that, feel free to go support another channel. He does tons of tier lists over there if you like that kind of thing. But just know this is a coincidence, but I have to give due where it's earned. Andrew posted this video a couple days before we get the opportunity to. With that said, let's actually jump in and let's start ranking because we have a ton to go over. Here is the tier list criteria. So we're going to have 5 different levels. We're going to have the absolute cheat code. These are the things that are like the GOAT preamps and channel strips. We have heavy hitters. These are going to be things that I would like to see in my rack pretty much all the time. We have almost great. This is going to be reserved for things that maybe do 1 or 2 things really, really well, but they're not the most versatile, or maybe they almost have a good sonic quality, but they're not quite up to par. Then there's going to be worth the upgrade. These are things that I think are better than your interface, but they're not stellar units. They're not going to be like game changers. They're not going to add a ton of character to your signal. And then there's going to be use your interface. These are things that I think might make the signal even worse, or they're things that I just don't think are worth the extra money. You would be better off just literally going clean into your interface and using that preamp and kind of adding your tone later. So with that said, those are all of the categories. Let's actually dive in and rank the first. I'm going to kind of split this into sections. So what we're going to do is cover like 1073s at first. And I want to cover the main ones, a couple clones, and kind of give you my thoughts and opinions. So the first one that we're going to talk about is the Neve 1073. These are the ones that you can purchase new. I think that these are the closest to like a vintage actual 1073 from an old console. If you were able to find a vintage 1073 that was pulled out of a console, they're like $20,000 per unit. Obviously, those are going to be in like the top tier. However, most of us don't have $20,000 for a single unit. So for this one, $4,000 for an 80 series rack, super pricey. However, I do think that this is one that if you do want that classic 1073 EQ and preamp, this is probably going to get you very close. The times that I've used these, I actually do think that the preamp does a good job of giving you that low warmth that you're kind of going to get from a 1073, and it has that nice open mid-range to where it adds thickness to your signal, but it doesn't add bloat and clutter. 1073s do this magical thing where it kind of takes a signal, pushes the upper mid-range, kind of fluffs up the lower range, and then that kind of low mid boxy range, it just clears that right up. I think this is a great preamp and EQ. I think that the mid-range band on this is absolutely beautiful, and for the price, $4,000, it is very steep, but it is kind of the golden standard. I'm going to put that one in absolute cheat code. I think that if we're basing the entire list off of basically 1073s, we have to put that one really high. The next one that we're going to talk about is the Neve SPX. This one is $1,950. As you can see, it looks very similar, just in a 19-inch rack unit, like a 1U unit. However, just because it says Neve and it says 1073, these don't really sound that similar to a 1073 to me. I think that the top end is a bit more brittle. I think that the low end isn't as like focused and fluffy. I think that they've basically made a clone of their own unit for half the price. And to me, I think it's a great preamp. I don't think that it is an amazing preamp. I would put that one in, I either want to put it in almost great or I want to put it in heavy hitters. Maybe I'll put it in heavy hitters because I do think that it is a great preamp. However, to have the 1073 name, I don't think that you're really getting close to that classic analog 1073 sound. And I don't think that you're even really getting close to that, you know, traditional Neve 1073 that would be the 80 series unit. With that said, let's move on to a clone of the 1073. This is my favorite clone by far. This is the BAE 1073. It's a little bit different because it does have a slightly different sonic signature. I will say also they make this unit if you only want the preamp and you don't want the EQ. I believe you can get that for like $1,600. However, since we're comparing it to the Neve units that also have EQ, I'm going to compare it to this one. It's $3,300. And out of every 1073 clone, even the new 1073s that we talked about that are $4,000, this might be my favorite. I think that the BAE It does have a slightly different tone. I think that it's a little bit more open. It's a little bit softer. I don't think that as you push it, it gets as kind of like hairy and fuzzy and 1073-ish as like an original. However, for modern recording, if I were to plug in something like my C800 or my Loudon Eden, I actually might use this over the new issued 1073s, not the SPXs, but this one up top. And so for that reason, I'm putting this in an absolute cheat code, and I might rearrange these. No, I'm going to do this. I think I feel good about this. So the BAE, amazing, 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 especially for the price. You save $700. The Neve 1073, super, super, super great. And then the SPX, great, but not quite a 1073. Then we move on to like the clones, and these are the Vintech X73. Vintech is a really cool company. I think that over the years, we've seen companies like Warm and Heritage and Black Lion get really, really popular for their clones. I think Vintech actually does a stellar job. You do pay a little bit more. I mean, at almost $2,000, you are getting to a different budget tier than some of the ones that we'll talk about in just a second. But I do think that the Vintech is worth the upgraded price from something like a Warm, and I think that it might be worth it to save a little bit in your budget to get this instead of something like a traditional 1073. I think that this is probably 90% there. And for that reason, I think I'm actually going to pop the Vintech and the heavy hitters, and I think I'm going to pop the AMX down here, or the SPX, I'm sorry. I'm going to pop the SPX in almost great because I feel like to be labeled 1073, it doesn't do the 1073 quality as well as something like the Vintech or either of these cheat code options. However, still solid. The Vintech is beautiful. For under $2,000, I think it's a great channel strip. I think that the EQ on this one actually matches the vintage 1073 a lot better than something like the SPX does. And so for that reason, I'm popping that in heavy hitters. The next one that we have is the Warm 1073. We're starting to get onto some of the more budget-friendly clones. And to me, I've talked about Warm on this channel before. They're never really my first choice. I think that at the price point for $900 to get the preamp and the EQ, it is super convincing to want to try it. However, I think that the preamp side of this is not nearly as open and warm and silky as something like a BAE or the $4,000 Neve or the Vintech. And then I think that the EQ gets really, really brittle really fast. I think that this mid-range band can get really kind of like hairy, and I think that this top-end band can get really sibilant over here, and then I think that the low-end band can get really unfocused pretty quickly. And so for that, I'm going to say maybe worth the upgrade, but I don't think that it is incredible. I think that it's still going to be a cool choice to have if you're moving on from like your internal preamp and your interface. However, it's my least favorite of the 1073 clones so far by quite a big margin. The next one that we have is the Golden Age Pre-73. I'll be honest, this thing is only $350. This one does not come with the EQs. It is literally just a mic pre. And I think that the mic pre part of this one does sound a little bit better than the Warm audio. And so for that reason, I will say also this is the Mark IV. These are the newer ones. I think I actually used the Mark III a couple years ago. But with that said, the Mark III would have been probably put right here and worth the upgrade, and I would put it above the Warm Audio 1073 because it's half the price, right? Like, yes, it doesn't have the EQ, but I don't really like the EQ in the Warm Audio 1073 either way. So I'm going to put that one right there. I think that if you are on the market to get a secondary preamp outside of your interface, I think that the Golden Age is not the worst first choice. I will say, though, that it's not going to be, like, incredible. It's not going to color your sound and give you this beautiful, wide open sound that is just gorgeous, gorgeous. But the next one that we're going to talk about is another clone. This is the last 1073 style clone that we'll talk about. This is the Heritage Audio HA73 Elite. This one is the same price as the Warm Audio, but I think that the preamp and the EQ on this one sounds a lot better. I think that for this one, the preamp does sound a little bit more open in the low mid range. It's not going to give you that like super, super warm, fluffy thing that a 1073 will give you, especially on like a male vocal or a kick drum. But I do think that the mid-range opens it up quite a bit, and I think it does kind of make any kind of like decent microphone sing a little bit more. I think that it kind of does open up the top end. I think that it will give that vocal a little bit of like a high mid push forward, which is what I'm using a 1073 for most of the time. And so for this, I would say this is a great choice in your studio. I'm going to go ahead and put this one in. I'm going to put this one in almost great, and I might even put it above the SPX because it is less than half the price. I will say the SPX does sound marginally better, but at half the price, I would probably get two of the Heritages before I would get the SPX. With that said, I still don't think either one really come close to the BAE or the actual 1073 up here, the $4,000 one. And if I were to get a clone, I would probably still choose the Vintech if I had the budget. So that's kind of my 1073 and 1073 clone shootout right there. I will say we kind of have a little bridge right here because we're going to move on to the Heritage 81A. So this is the 1073 style preamp and an HA81 and a 1081 style EQ. So the difference is that the 1081 was really, really known for its EQ. It kind of takes the 1073 EQ and pushes it a little bit farther. You get an extra band. I think that you can push it a little bit harder without it starting to break up as fast. However, on the vintage 1081s, a lot of people prefer the preamp of a 1073. So you see Heritage Audio do something right here where they're saying, we're going to give you that nice, warm, kind of mid-rangey, fluffy preamp in a 1073, but then we're going to give you that more cutting EQ with a little bit more choices. We're going to have a little bit more control over it to really kind of tailor that sound like you would in a 1081. And this is actually something that I've had in my own personal rack for years. And for $1,200, I think that this thing is killer. I think that it is one of the better kind of 1073 style channel strips that you'll get. And for that, I'm going to put this one in heavy hitter. I think that for the price, we're really starting to get somewhere. I would choose this over the 1073 SPX or the Heritage 1073 because I like the EQ of the 81 a lot better, but you still get that 1073 style preamp. Now let's go ahead and talk about the actual 1081. This is the 1081 preamp and the 1081 EQ in one unit. As you can see, you do get that 1081 EQ with an extra band, a little bit more control. The dials are a little bit more dialed in. You have things like Q controls that are a little bit finer. However, the 1081 is a slightly different style preamp. I think that it's, if I'm going to have something that I don't want nearly as colored, like let's say I am using like a really warm, fluffy mic, like if I'm using a U47, something that already has a lot of low end and it's really big and beautiful and bloomy, I don't necessarily need to run that through a 1073. I'd probably run that through something more like a 1081. If I want something that's not nearly as vibey, but I want more EQ control and I want a preamp that I think is a little bit cleaner and a little bit more open, I'm going to choose a 1081. But I think that it's not a sound that as many people are familiar with. I think most people will go with a 1080 or a 1073. For that, I would say that this is going to go at the top of my heavy hitters because I do still prefer the preamp in a 1073 a little bit more, but I do prefer the EQ in a 1081 a lot more, which is why you get something like that Heritage HA81A or even this Vintech right here, the X81. It's doing a really similar thing where you get a 1073 style preamp, which we know is really good from the Vintech 1073 that we talked about a little bit earlier, but you get that 81 style EQ, so you get an extra parametric control, you get high Q, you get a little bit more, fine tuning when it comes to the actual frequency positions. And so for that, I'm going to go ahead and actually rank this in a cheat code. I think that this is a great kind of sleeper preamp. I think that if you try a 1073 and you think this is great, I just want it to be a little bit more kind of modernized, I think that the Vintech 81, by having that 1073 style clone and having that 81 style EQ at super good quality, really is a cheat code. It is expensive at $2,100. It's like double the price of the Heritage. However, this thing is incredible. I think not enough people have used this or talked about this. It is a unit that I would actually pick up for myself. Now that I have, a little bit of budget, it is something that I could see myself kind of getting rid of the Heritage and getting the Vintech. I think you kind of get the best of two of the most classic preamp channel strips. The next thing that we're going to talk about, we're kind of moving on to where we have preamps that kind of stand alone as preamps, is we're moving to the Chandler TG2. This thing is absolutely incredible. This is super pricey for just a preamp. There's no EQ, but you do get two channels, which is nice if you want to like stereo mic a piano or an acoustic guitar, which are two things that I think that this actually works really well on. Comparing this to like a 1073, I think that it is a bit brighter. It's a bit more open in the mid-range. I think that it is beautiful for pop vocals. It's amazing on drum overheads, kind of clears up that boxy room sound. It's really beautiful on like pianos. I think it can really clean up the mid-range in a piano, and it can really push it towards the front of the mix by kind of enhancing the top end. And so with that said, this is something that you're going to see in a lot of studios. There was a vocal chain maybe 10, 15 years ago that was like the Katy Perry chain. It was a Manley reference into a Chandler TG2, which is actually really funny because it's a really bright mic with a pretty bright preamp. However, it's a beautiful combo. I think that this does something to the top end to where it'll kind of push it forward in a mix without it getting overly spitty or crunchy or sibilant. But if you're preferring that kind of like beefy, warm low end for a 1073 for something like a kick drum, this is probably not going to do it. I would say vocals, acoustic guitar, pianos, this thing is absolutely going to rip though. For this, I'm going to put this in heavy hitter. I think it's not quite as versatile as a 1073 or even like this 1073 and 1081 combo, but I am going to put it at the top of heavy hitters because just as a mic pre, it is one that I might reach for the most. I think that it is gorgeous sounding. On the basically complete opposite side, we have this Soya's Lakeside. This is a single channel preamp, so at $1,600 for one channel. This is very, very pricey. Soya's is not known for making, super budget-friendly gear. However, they are known for making super, super, super high-quality gear. This kind of has their sonic signature. It's thick, it's round, it kind of controls transients in a way that, like, some preamps don't have a compressor in them, but the way that they operate on audio with the transistors inside kind of start to actually, control some of those transients, kind of open up some of the range of it. And I think that the Lakeside will do that. I think that it kind of fluffs something up. I think that it would be amazing for like acoustic guitar or kick drum, something that you still want the transient there, but you might want to take off that sharp little poke to kind of open it up in a mix, kind of give it more perceived loudness. I think that this is really, really cool. I think if you have, female vocals for like a jazz record that you want to have a little bit more beef and low end, this would do a great job at that. I think if you have like a really chesty male vocal, this might get a little bit thick. But if you're doing jazz, if you're doing singer-songwriter, if you're doing, like more stripped down country, this is a channel strip that I think is worth having in your rack. It's beautiful. The design is absolutely incredible. I am going to put this one in the middle of heavy hitters. I think that you're kind of getting a really signature sound in this one. Doesn't have any EQ, doesn't have any controls, but it is amazing sounding. Now we're moving on to one. Technically, this one does have an EQ. When I was making my list and kind of organizing it, this probably should be closer to like the preamp EQ channel strip section. However, it's already right here and I want to talk about it. It's the VLC tube mic preamp and EQ. It also has a DI on it, and this thing is insane. I actually have a whole video on trying the VLC and the VNE in my studio. And this is one that if I just have money burning a hole in my pocket, this will be one of the next things that I buy. It is absolutely incredible. In general, Hazelrig has this kind of like tube quality about it where it can open up the mid-range, kind of soften up the top end. It can really push something forward in a mix. I think that the EQ on this is stunning. I think that you can make something super bright without it being harsh. I think that you can make something super beefy in the low end without it being kind of tubby and bloated. And then even with the EQ off, the mic preamp just does such a good job of like tightening up a source and really making the microphone that you're plugging into it the best version of itself. With that said, you can have this be really, really, really transparent. If you want to start boosting it and you want to start driving the gain and you want to start kind of pushing some of these EQs, there are going to be some really cool like even order harmonics that Hazelrig Industries is really known for. So you could have this thing get a little bit gritty and vibey. You can have it be really, really clean. To me, it might be my favorite preamp that I've ever used. I might prefer it even to like a 1073 because I like a cleaner preamp. I like a mic to have a little bit more character, but I can push this if I need to. I think that at $4,000, I would probably get this over the Neve 1073 every day of the week. With that said, try one out if you haven't gotten the chance. They are incredible. The next thing that I want to talk about is Focusrite ISA. This is a standalone preamp. You've probably seen them sitting on desk in studios. And one thing that I think that this is really good for is it just gives engineers a lot more control. You have things like a reamp feature, you have a DI feature, you have things like input filtering, you have trim knobs, you have a high Z input, you can control impedances. I think that this basically works as like a workhorse in a studio. I don't think that the actual sonic quality of the preamp is really anything special, but I think if you're plugging in ribbon mics and dynamic mics and tube mics and 48 volt phantom power mics and you're reamping guitar pedals, this is kind of a nice preamp to have in the studio. I don't think that the sonic signature is really the strong suit. I think it's more of the feature set. So with that said, I will say worth the upgrade. At $700 to basically be a utility preamp, it's not horrible, but it's never a sound that I would be like, oh my God, what is the sound of that vocal? And you would say, oh, it's the Focusrite ISA. Instead, it's just something that I would have in the studio to make my job a little bit easier as an engineer. The next one that we're going to talk about is kind of the opposite of that, and it's just pure tone. This is the Chandler Red 47. This is a tube mic preamp. Again, there's no real super crazy feature set on this. You don't have like a bunch of EQ bands. You do have a DI on the front, which I actually really, really like. I love when a preamp gives you a DI because running your guitars or your bass through an actual preamp DI really does a lot to kind of clean up noise floor and just kind of clean up the mid-range of a guitar or a bass. But this thing is crazy. This thing has that like tubey sound, again, similar to like the VLC where you can really push the fluffy low end. However, this thing is a bit brighter than the VLC from Hazel Rig. I think that if you're using a really bright mic, like if I'm using a C800 into this, it is going to rip somebody's head off. I think that if you were to use it for like a kick drum where you might want a little bit of clarity, or a room mic that you might want a little bit of clarity, or even something like an older piano that maybe the strings are a little bit dead on, if you have something like a more muted acoustic guitar, I think it does a good job of making the low end feel super warm, and it adds that nice saturation to it to really get it to sit well in a mix, to kind of almost compress itself. But you're not going to get that like super crunchy mid-range that you can if you start driving like a 1073. Instead, you're going to get more of like a really kind of shiny top end. So it's really cool. I think pairing this with a really dark mic like a U47 could also be a really cool choice. I wouldn't pair it with any of the mics that I use in my studio unless it was maybe the Eden on a gentle setting, but I think that this thing, I will say, almost great. It's a little bit bright for my taste. It's a little bit one-dimensional in terms of feature set for my taste, and at $2,500, it either needs to sound absolutely incredible or it needs to have a feature set where I can make it sound absolutely incredible. And it's kind of just right in the middle for me. The next one that we're going to talk about was my first piece of outboard gear ever. This is the Art Pro MPA 2. This is a 2-channel tube microphone preamp. I literally got this, and then I got the Art maybe VLA, it was like their microphone compressor. I really just got this so I could use the compressor as well. I will say I don't remember liking the sound at all, even early in my career. That could have easily been a skill issue because I was a lot younger. I was new to engineering. But I feel like half the time that I used this, it made my audio sound worse than if I wouldn't have used anything at all. I think that at that price point, you start getting it to where people who might not know what they're doing the most use it in their studio. And I will say that my whole ethos on outboard gear is if you don't know how to use it, do not commit it to your tracks. I think it's really scary to be using compression and EQ and saturation and baking that into your track if you're not really diligent on getting that source to sound right, because otherwise you're just fucking up your clean audio. And so for that, I would just put this in the user interface group. I think that at this price range, it's not doing anything for the sonic quality that I love. It's not making a mic sound better. In general, it's just making engineers dial in shit that's probably going to be wrong 90% of the time. Then we move on to something like the Grace Designs M101. This is a little half-rack preamp. A lot of people just pop them on their desktop as well. I will say if you need clean gain, this is kind of like the GOAT. If you need something that is just really going to drive an instrument input, or really going to drive a mic that needs a lot of gain, like you would look at like a dynamic mic, this is incredible. I think that the DI on this is absolutely incredible too. It's super clean. It will deliver phantom power. I think that it actually is really great for a ribbon mic. I think it can kind of clean up some of the noise and some of that fluffiness that you get in a ribbon. With that said, at $833, it's not going to like impart the most beautiful sonic signature on your sound. However, for what it does, I think it is the best in class. And for that, I will say heavy hitters. I think if you're using a lot of microphones that need gain, it's the best option for that. It kind of is the big brother to the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is a cloud lifter. This is literally just a clean gain signal booster. You see these paired with like an SM7B or an SM57 a lot for recording. It's literally just to add 25 dB of gain for a mic. It's not really doing much. Cleans up signal and noise floor. I guess it does the job for what it is. At $129, I feel like every studio should probably have one. However, when I'm thinking of preamps, this is not like, if somebody told me that this was in their mic chain, I would be like, whatever, it's fine. So for that, I'm going to say worth the upgrade. Like, I think that it's worth having a couple in the studio. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the Audient ASP800. So we're kind of getting into a new tier now where we're talking about preamps that are used mainly for like expansion. This was one of the first things that I ever bought when I had a 2-channel interface and I wanted to add a lot more channels for like maybe recording drums or maybe doing like a live track session. I think this did a decent job at that. What I do like is you get two preamps on the front here that have DI inputs, and you have like the HMX and the iron where you can, it essentially just adds an extra circuit that will add a little bit of extra tone and character. And then you get 6 other just completely clean kind of whatever preamps. I will say they're nothing special. The preamps, I think that if you need a unit that's going to work with ADAT to just expand your interface I/O, this is a great option at $1,100 you get, or $1,200, you get 8 new inputs. I think that the 2 HMX inputs over here are super, super, super fire. The rest of the 6, if you need inputs, I think it's a decent option. They're clean, they're quiet, they're not super, super noisy. I will say it's worth the upgrade, but it's not going to do anything absolutely incredible for your workflow. The next one is the Focusrite Opto Pre. Again, this is most people's like first interface expansion kit. It works with ADAT as well. It'll add 8 extra line inputs and outputs. One thing that I will say is like, this is literally just 8 of the Scarlett interfaces basically popped into one. I think that if you're going to upgrade, there's better options. If you literally just need inputs and outputs, it's fine. In terms of like a preamp, I almost don't even want to consider it a preamp because it is literally not adding anything to the sound whatsoever. It's not going to clean up sound. It's not going to add anything that your input wouldn't add on your interface. It's just giving you 8 more of those. So I'm just going to say use your interface unless you need the inputs and outputs. The next one that we'll talk about is the Warm Audio WA412. This is a 4-channel microphone preamp, and this one is kind of, I believe, just like based off of the API, either the 312 or the 512. We'll talk about those in just a little while. I do think that this is, for Warm, I think this is actually one of their better pieces of equipment. I think that in general, this was early in their process, I believe. This, and then we'll talk about the Tone Beast in a second. I think that it does a decent job of pushing that mid-range bite, kind of doing the thing that API does where it'll give you a little bit of that bite and grit and clarity. Again, with like, it doesn't have any EQ controls or whatever. It's just a preamp. I think it's cool. This is great if you have like a drum kit and you just need maybe like your kick, your snare, and 2 toms to really just push forward in a mix a little bit. It's a great, super affordable option to get 4 inputs to kind of do that. I will say it's not the worst thing that Warm makes. I would even say it's almost great. I'm going to put it at the bottom of almost great. I would put it right there. It's not a bad preamp at all. It does the API thing okay, and it's pretty affordable. The next one that we'll talk about is the Tone Beast 12 preamp. This thing is just, I think it's essentially 1 channel of that 412 that I just showed you. But you do get the option to add controls over here. Like you can make it go between like, I believe it's discrete and clean. What is this over here? You can go between like nickel and I can't read that on there. I want to say it's like steel or something like that. And then there's another kind of transformer knob over here. I will say for this one to have some extra features, I feel like this is when Warm Audio starts cooking, is like they take something and then they start putting new options on it. You have your variable impedance. There are input and output filters. I think that it's kind of a cool tool. If I were to buy one thing from Warm Audio, it might be this. I might even pop this. I might pop it slightly above, what is that, the Heritage Audio. I'm going to put it right here. I think it's almost great. The preamp is not like my absolute favorite, but the 412 is decent, and it takes 1 channel of the 412 and puts some cool little spins on it. I'm fine with it going right there. The next thing that we're going to talk about, we're kind of getting into channel strips a little bit more, is this is the Rupert Neve Designs Shelfboard. This is a single channel microphone preamp. It also has an EQ and a compressor. This thing is absolutely beautiful. This is, if you want kind of that classic Neve sound that's like kind of warm and gushy and soft and fluffy in the low end, but then kind of like pushes the mid-range. I think that this does that really, really well. You also get a DI and a through input on the front, which I think are great features. At $4,000 for a single channel, this is super, super pricey, but the EQ in this is really, really solid. The compressor in this is not my favorite. I feel like they could literally, if they took the compressor out and made this unit $3,000, I would buy it in a heartbeat. But the actual preamp and EQ in this is beautiful. I feel like this is almost closer to like what the original Neve stuff was doing, even more than like the SPX or the AMX or whatever they call that series. The Rupert Neve Shelford is beautiful. For that reason, I'm going to put it in heavy hitters. I will say it is a little bit warm and kind of vintagey for typically what I'm doing in my studio, which is why I actually picked the next one that we're going to talk about, and that is the Rupert Neve Designs Newton. So this is only $2,000. It is a preamp, an EQ, a compressor, and you get that Rupert Neve red or blue silk, which is just a little bit of saturation. This thing is insane. I run every microphone through it. I run every guitar through it. I run every piece of percussion through it. I have thought about getting a second one and doing them on my mix bus as a stereo pair. This thing is insane. The mic preamp is beautiful. It's wide open. It makes every microphone that I plug into it sound a little bit better. Kind of opens up it, kind of cleans up some of the mid-range, pushes some of the top end. This EQ is also incredible. I love using the low pass just to clean up like signal noise. And then the high shelf over here at like 8 and 16K, you can absolutely crank that thing. It does not get brittle. It does not get harsh. It does not get sharp. I love it. Once again, the compressor on this, very whatever to me. I almost never use it. Maybe for like voiceovers like this, I'll turn it on a little bit. It's a little bit slower, a little bit squishier. And I have plenty of compression in my channel strip anyway, on my actual sidecar. So I don't use the compressor of this, but the Silk is insane. It's great for adding texture. It's great for adding vibe. I will say the mic pre, the EQ, and the texture on this, the Silk, I wouldn't be surprised if this unit was $2,500 and was still a bestseller. This is so good. Let's see, what do we have up here? I'm gonna put it right above the Chandler TG2, actually. I think that for what I do, the preamp works maybe even a little bit better than the TG2. I think that could get bright on my kind of mics that I'm using in the studio. What is this one down here? The 81. I will say maybe I'm going to put the 81 up here. I feel the bad for the 81 falling to like clones and stuff like that. I'm going to put the 81 and then I'm going to put the Rupert Neve Newton. It's incredible. Let's move on to the Avalon 737. Had a huge moment in like the hip hop community. I think that this does a really good job of, especially on like hip hop vocals and R&B vocals, it makes a vocal feel a little bit more mix ready. It kind of carves out some of that mid range. It kind of makes the top end super bright and silky. I think that the compressor in this isn't for me or most people. I hardly ever see people use the compressor in this. And I think that the EQ feels a little bit sterile and sharp. I think that at the price, I don't like the EQ a ton. I don't like the compressor a ton. I do like the preamp quite a bit, but at $4,000, I feel like it's almost great. I feel like if I'm only liking one element of it for $4,000, we're going to rank that down here. I'm going to put it above the SPX because I think that I still prefer the preamp sound. No, I'm going to put it below because it's twice the price. Like what the hell am I talking about? Avalon, I'm going to put in almost great. Not essential for my workflow. Don't love every element of it. Let's move on to the 610. This is a completely different preamp than anything that we've talked about before. We've been kind of focusing on like how something would handle vocals or like my own workflow. 610, I'm not going to run a vocal through that. What I do like the 610 for is something that I want to add a lot of beef to. It is amazing on acoustic guitars because what it does is it adds a really solid, consistent low end that doesn't get really tubby or resonant. And then it can control some of those sharper transients up top, and it can really just slide an acoustic guitar right into a mix. I also love this for bass guitar. I think driving this with a bass guitar and kind of getting that preamp to break up a little bit, getting that Opto compressor in it to kind of do its thing, it makes it squishy, makes it fun, makes it fluffy. I love this thing for acoustic and bass. I like the way that it will round off transients, but I'm not using it on vocals. I'm not using it on, kick drums, snare drums. I will say on like a piano or something, it would be gorgeous as well. For that, I will put it in, I'm going to put it in heavy hitter because for what I would use it on, I think that it is incredible. For an everyday preamp, like there's no way that this is like the preamp in your studio. Like there's no way that this is like the only preamp that you're using, but for what it does, it's absolutely beautiful. Let's move on to the next one. This is the Mag Pre-Q2. I think that if I'm looking for a clean, nice, open preamp that's not going to make it super vibey, super vintagey, and then I want to have like a modern EQ, this to me is the gold standard. I think that Mag has the silkiest top end that I've ever heard on an EQ. This airband up here, you could pop this on 20 or 40K or whatever it goes to, crank it all the way up, and it will literally just open up a vocal, open up a hi-hat, open up an overhead, open up an entire mix. With this being a 2-channel, I'm not even upset if you're using this on like a bus, like maybe your synths group. I think that this thing is absolutely incredible. For $2,600 to get 2 channels of a super, super clean, nice, open, quiet preamp and one of the best top-end EQs that I've ever heard. This thing is incredible. I'm going to put this in an absolute cheat code. I feel like more people should use it. It is a unit that I'm kind of upset is not in my rack over here right now. It might be one that I have to add very, very, very soon. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the UA710. This is a 4-channel mic preamp and compressor. It's cool. I like that you can swap between solid state and tube on this. I think that it gives you a lot of options. However, it wouldn't be my first solid state preamp and it wouldn't be my first tube preamp. I think it's cool to kind of learn what you like. It's flexible. It's a workhorse. I think that it does a lot of things well, but it doesn't do anything the best to me. So at $2,000 for 4 channels to get a bunch of different options, I think it's sick. I also love that you get 4 DIs on the front. That's a great option as well. And at $2,000 to have 4 channels, I'm not mad at this. I would put this at the top of almost great. I think that it does what it does decent, but nothing about it is like an absolute game changer for me. Let's move on to talk about some 500 series stuff. The first one that we have is the API 512, kind of an industry standard on drums, on guitars. I think that what this does to mid-range is absolutely beautiful. It will make something so forward and punchy and crunchy, but not super bright, not super polished, not super gritty either. It kind of operates in this cool middle zone to where it will add vibe, it will add punch, and it will add texture and character, but it's not going to make the audio break apart. And I think that if you're looking for something to put on snare drums, kick drums, acoustic guitar, piano, if you want something that will preserve transients and push mid-range, this is going to be the preamp for you. At $1,000, it is a little bit pricey for one unit. You do have to have a 500 series chassis, but I will say I'm going to put this one in cheat code as well. If I want something for that sound, I'm going for the API 512. If I want something with a slightly different character, you can get the API 312. It's a little bit more affordable. I think that it's similar. It's a little bit softer. It's a little bit rounder. It's a little bit more reserved in kind of like the top end and the mid range. It's not going to be as like crunchy and forward as something like the 512. But if I want to go for like a warmer piano or maybe like a Rhodes or maybe like a noisy like electric guitar cabinet, I'm actually going to pick this one. If I want that API bite, but I don't necessarily want it to rip my head off of a source, I think that the 312 does a good job at just kind of trimming that back a little bit. I will say I like that the 512 also has the DI on the front. That's a great feature as well. But for this one, I'm going to put this one in, I'm going to put it in the bottom of heavy hitters. I think that what it does is great, but it's not the most mind-blowing thing that I've ever heard from API. And then the last one that we'll talk about is a 500 series. This is from Rupert Neve Designs, the same people that make the Shelford and the Newton channel strip that we talked about. Not to be confused with like the Neve or the Neve SPX stuff that we talked about earlier. This is their 500 series mic preamp. It's great. I think that it has that silk on it, which is really, really nice. If you want to add a little bit of texture and clarity, having a high pass is really nice if you want to clean up like just ground noise and rumble. And then I think that the actual preamp is a nice, clean, open 500 series preamp. I think that similar to kind of what I said about the Focusrite ISA, where like it's kind of doing something really clean. It's doing something really, I don't even want to say sterile, I guess just really precise. I think that this is great on the front of any 500 series. If you just need to run something through that needs to be a slightly better version of itself, you're not going to have a ton of character. You're not going to have a ton of bite. You're not going to have a ton of fluff. But with that texture knob on there, you can add a little bit of that, grit or a little bit of that pizzazz if you want. Having your phantom power in here, having a phase switch, it kind of becomes a utility preamp for me. And at $800, it's not like a huge bank breaker. I would put this in maybe almost great, like in the middle of almost great. It's probably never going to be like a first option for me, but it's also not going to be something that like I would be upset if it was in my 500 series. So with that said, I think we ranked 31 preamps. This is kind of my overall view. If you agree with any, let me know in the comments down below. If you disagree with any, let me know in the comments down below. I know that these videos are funny because people would like to hear shootouts, but unless all of these companies or somebody who owns these mics wants to send, or these preamps wants to send them over, I can't afford to, and I don't have the time to shoot out like $100,000 of mic preamps. So with that said, use these kind of tier lists to maybe show you what you should go research, show you what you should go check out, show you what you should try in your studio. But that's my opinion on mic pre's. Some are great for vocals, some are great for guitars, some are great for drums, some are great for nothing, but hopefully this video was a big help. If you like this, please make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. My name is Austin. I forgot to introduce myself earlier. We jumped right into it, but we do videos like this every single Friday. So if you like this, make sure that you subscribe so you can catch us next Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern time. And then other than that, I'll see you next week with more content. Much love. Peace.